French is not just a language, it's a people. For our recent past century, the definition of an American has gone through multiple theories: the multicultural, melting pot, last core, pan European, and creedal. These theories reflect the changes of time in ways politicians have divided and conquered our land. It is a prominent issue, a matter of discussion, since it further identifies the future of our nation. First, let's define our nation. A nation is a group of ethnocentric people from which the word ethnos derives. It is a homogeneous group who share kinship and blood. They biologically identify each other as the same group of people, and their culture maintains the sense of that sense of ethnic social belonging. It also encompasses shared language, culture, governance, autonomy, and history. For example, the French people are Gallo-Romans who speak French and are French. Notice how French is not just a language, but also a group of people. A culture is a set of characteristics that define an identity. For example, Texans, the Anglo settlers from the Founding Fathers, often rode on horses to every town and are known to have an identity based on raising, riding, and using horses every day. It is an identity that is prominent to each and every Texan family, at least before the turn of the century. The cowboy and cowgirl identity is also a staple of what makes a Texan different from a Yankee and vice versa. Governance is the power structure of accountability and hierarchy people form to regulate their own people. It is not an idea, but rather a natural order of survival. Without a leader, there is no one to bring a collective group to defend against invaders who have every interest against them. From top to bottom, the English have the monarchy, the consorts, the heirs, the royal family, the clergy, the loyal guards, the politicians, the military, and the common population. This is to ensure a chain of command in order to sort out the nuance of potential invaders and grievances, as well as provide a uniform loyalty to governance that ensures the survival of the entire nation as a whole. Autonomy is another aspect of an ethnocentrism where the customs and passage of right between the different levels of social hierarchy are mutually passed. For example, it is proper for the entire population to pledge allegiance and salute to the monarch as much as it is normal for the man to open doors for the woman. Last but not least, history. History is the years of survival and prosperity a nation goes through despite the difference between the environment and the nation. The French have fought the English in countless battles for 1,000 years, and the Prussians have fought many coalition wars against Napoleon. This is the definition of history: the will to survive and thrive, the willingness for people to stand up and fight for their own people's survival. These are the defining traits of a nation, primarily its ethnic preservation. In 1924, a philosopher named Horace Kallen wrote in response to the melting pot theory that instead of multiple ethnicities coming together to form this one uniform identity, each ethnicity should retain their own identity held by a government who regulates the distinct identities of people. It's called cultural pluralism, and its fundamental roots are grounded in his secular Zionism, which is quite anti-American. Since secularism posits the idea of separating people into individual units as an anarchical typology, it lends itself a defiance to human survival since it ignores the importance of belonging in sociology. Zionism is the idea of supporting a group of Israelites and Judea descendants as a form of sacred responsibility, even at the expense of another country's will. So obviously, this idea of cultural pluralism, introduced by Horace, was already fundamentally at its root condemning to the natural order of a nation and the survival of people's identity. This quickly became a popular ideology that those on the left political spectrum adopted. It would later form further manifest in their immigration laws in the 60s onward. However, it clearly defines what a nation truly is, let alone divide a nation. In fact, this is more of a national parasite that takes the host and deprives of its nutrients. The next theory is the melting pot theory. The melting pot theory was introduced by Israel Zane Wells, a Jewish author play called The Melting Pot, which became a cultural phenomenon. It was the idea that in a time when globalization has met industrialization, immigrants start to have the idea that they can assimilate to a nation's identity as long as they follow and adhere to each other's overarching identity that will eventually become known through mingling. This is unfortunate because this clearly is not what a nation is. Also, the left and pro-Israel people tend to argue that immigration is the staple of a nation, therefore the melting pot is a justified claim of what a nation is. However, you cannot have a group of people without a nation, and by putting nations together in a melting pot is only going to form a bastardized version of all these nations. That's not what a nation is. A nation is homogeneous. A nation is a group of people who have moved to certain territories, but historically, and through the test of time, a group of homogeneous people who have formed a territory of what they consider to be their land. Therefore, the immigration argument about coming into another nation's land to form a nation is an obscure and shallow attempt to tackle the natural definition of a nation. The next theory is the WASP core theory, which is the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant core theory. This theory, introduced by C. Wright Mills during the Silver Age of America, postulates that an American is someone who is an Anglo-Saxon Protestant who dominates the culture, economics, and social class of the land. This is closer to the definition of a nation since British migrants formed the nation that we know as America. British people at the time are Protestants and have historically been Protestants for a while, even after major religious conflicts with Catholics. In fact, when you look at the Union Jack American flag, it shows that Americans are a group of British Germanic people who fled for Protestantism and freed from religious persecutions, let alone religious abuse. However, the theory fails and kind of falls short since it focuses on the framework of work ethic, economic ideology, and religious and cultural norms form the basis of national identity. It sort of dabbles on the heritage Americans, the founding stock, and then quickly depletes itself in a more abstract way that assimilates non-white people into this cultural pendulum. So yet again, this theory still lacks and falls short of what a true definition, what a true nation is. Okay, the next theory is the Pan-European theory. The Pan-European theory is pretty close in explaining and defining the American identity, except that instead of Americans being truly homogenous, Americans are a group of Pan-European mixing of different nations together to form one nation that is known as the American nation. That is not true. This is more on the basis that many non-British Europeans migrated over to mingle with the Americans, while the Americans were really the British migrants who established the sovereign states after the end of the Revolutionary War. The next theory is the creedal theory. The creedal theory states that people who assimilate to the ideas of American values are considered American. Vivek Ramaswamy is a prominent supporter that those who come and work hard are considered American. This batshit graped, bastardized, milquetoast form of a nation degenerates this nation as a whole and what this nation is about. In the end, an American is someone who belongs to the 13 colonies, from the founding fathers who shed their blood, or the Anglo-British people who later formed their own government, presided over the foundations of economic and religious unity that governs their meaning and purpose as well as their identity as a collective group of people. Today, there are about 90 million Americans who exist on this land, and many of them are getting old. Why does this all matter? Well, we've seen how many foreign people have come over to take over our land and strip away the identity of the Americans and redefine that nationality with something more civic. If you're a white person out there, let alone an American listening to this message, by all means, Network with your fellow Americans because the takeover and invasion has been happening for a very long time. Defend your people, defend your nation, and remember, nature wins, truth prevails, and justice serves.